There is a version of an avoidant person that almost nobody in their life has ever actually met. Not their co-workers who see the confident, unbothered exterior. Not their friends who hear the casual explanations and the jokes that deflect anything too real. Sometimes not even the people who claim to know them best, the ones who've been closest to them and still walked away wondering if they ever truly saw the whole picture. This hidden version only comes out when the lights go off, when the phone stops buzzing, when the world finally stops requiring them to perform the calm, self-sufficient act they have spent years perfecting. If you have ever wondered what someone avoidant actually feels when nobody is watching, stay with me, because I am about to walk you through 8 things they do in the dark that reveal exactly how much they are carrying underneath that composed exterior. And by the time we get through all 8, you will understand something about avoidant people that most explanations never come close to touching. Before we get into the specifics, I want you to understand something that will make everything else make sense. Because without this piece, the rest of what I'm about to describe will sound contradictory. Avoidant people are not calm because they feel less than everyone else. They are calm because they have trained themselves, often since childhood, to keep their nervous system's true readings hidden from view, sometimes hidden even from themselves. This training didn't happen because they chose it consciously one day. It happened gradually, in response to an environment early in life, where showing need led to disappointment, where expressing vulnerability led to dismissal or ridicule, or simply being left alone with the feeling until it passed on its own. The nervous system adapts to what it's given, and theirs adapted by learning that the safest thing to do with big feelings is to not let them surface where anyone, including the self, could see them clearly. Daytime is when that training holds. Daytime has structure, has other people watching, has a role to play, has 1,000 small distractions lined up back to back that make it easy to never sit still long enough for anything uncomfortable to catch up. Nighttime has none of that, and that is exactly why the dark tells the truth, that daylight never will. When the noise stops, when the last obligation of the day has been fulfilled, when there is nothing left to perform for and no one left to perform to, something in an avoidant person's internal world finally gets quiet enough to be heard. And what surfaces in that quiet is often far more tender, far more complicated, and far more human than anything they'd ever let you witness while the sun was still up. The first thing that happens almost every single night for someone carrying unresolved longing is what I call the silent scroll. This isn't regular phone use in the way most people would think of it. This is a specific, almost trance-like habit of opening an app, staring at the screen without actually absorbing a single thing on it, and closing it again a few minutes later, having retained almost nothing. If you watched their eyes during this, you would notice they aren't actually reading. They aren't actually watching whatever content happens to be in front of them. Their thumb moves out of muscle memory, scrolling automatically, while their mind has drifted somewhere else entirely, usually somewhere back in time, toward a person, a conversation, a specific memory, or a version of their life that felt different from the one they are currently sitting alone in. The phone in their hand is essentially a prop. It gives their hands something to do and gives their mind an excuse for staying awake instead of confronting why they can't fall asleep in the first place. The real activity happening during the silent scroll has almost nothing to do with whatever is on the screen and everything to do with what's happening several layers beneath it. The second thing is a strange kind of physical restlessness that has no obvious external explanation. They will get into bed, feel immediately uncomfortable, and get back out. They will walk to the kitchen for no clear reason, open the fridge, stand there staring at its contents for a few seconds, and close it without taking anything at all. This isn't hunger, and it isn't really about the kitchen. This is a body trying to physically outrun a feeling that hasn't fully identified itself yet, an emotion still forming somewhere below conscious awareness that the body senses before the mind catches up to it. Avoidant people are often remarkably skilled at intercepting an emotion before it fully takes shape and rerouting that energy into movement, into small tasks, into anything except sitting still long enough to actually feel whatever it is. During the day, there are 1,000 legitimate reasons to stay busy, and busyness becomes a socially acceptable way of never confronting what's underneath. But at night, there's nowhere left to reroute that energy to. The rooms run out. Eventually, the body has paced through every available distraction, and there is nothing left to do but lie back down in the same dark room with the same unresolved feeling waiting exactly where it was left. The third thing, and this one is genuinely strange if you have never understood the psychology sitting underneath it, is that avoidant people will often have entire conversations with themselves that never make it past their own mind. Not out loud usually, though sometimes it does slip into a whisper when they're truly alone. These are internal arguments, full rehearsals of what they would say if they finally reached out to someone, complete with imagined responses, imagined tone, imagined outcomes. They will build an entire back and forth exchange in their head, turn by turn, anticipating exactly how the other person might react, how they'd respond to that reaction, how the whole thing would probably go sideways somewhere in the middle. And why, given all of that, it's better not to try at all. These internal dialogues can stretch on for what feels like hours, circling the same territory again and again, with slight variations each time, as if enough rehearsal might eventually produce a version of the conversation that feels safe enough to actually have. And at the end of all of it, more often than not, nothing gets sent. The entire conversation existed fully formed and fully felt, played out completely in private, and then quietly filed away as though it never happened at all, leaving no trace except the exhaustion of having lived through an emotional exchange that the other person never even knew was taking place. The fourth thing is memory, but not the softened, romanticized kind you might picture in your mind. It is specific, involuntary, and often startlingly precise. A particular sentence someone said months or even years earlier will surface out of nowhere with a clarity that feels almost cruel. The exact tone of someone's voice in one specific, unremarkable moment. A private joke that only ever made sense between two people, and that would mean nothing to anyone else who overheard it. These memories do not arrive politely or with warning. They arrive uninvited, usually while the avoidant person is doing something completely unrelated, brushing their teeth, staring at the ceiling, standing in the dark kitchen they just wandered into for no reason. And when these memories surface, there is almost always a visible flinch, even though nobody is there to witness it. This flinch happens because the memory carries warmth with it, and warmth to someone who has spent years treating emotional closeness as something inherently risky registers as dangerously close to wanting something they have spent enormous effort convincing themselves they don't need. The memory itself is rarely dramatic. It is almost always something small. But small things, repeated enough times in the quiet, accumulate into something the avoidant mind can no longer pretend not to notice. The fifth strange thing is checking without connecting, and this is the behavior most people on the outside completely misread as indifference, when in reality, it is very close to the opposite. This looks like opening someone's social media profile late at night, not to comment on anything, not to like a post, not to engage in any way that could be seen or traced, but simply to look, to confirm that the person still exists in the world in more or less the same shape they left them in. To see if anything visible has changed, a new photo, a caption, some small sign of how that person's life is unfolding without them in it. This is not about romance in any conventional sense, and it is rarely about genuine curiosity either. It is about proximity without risk. It allows an avoidant person to feel close to someone, to maintain some invisible thread of connection without ever having to expose themselves to the vulnerability that direct contact would require. This behavior happens far more often than most avoidant people would ever admit out loud, even to themselves. And it happens specifically at night, in the hours when the usual daytime excuses for staying occupied have run out, and the pull toward that particular person becomes considerably harder to outrun or distract from. They look, they close the app, they tell themselves it meant nothing, and some part of them, quietly but unmistakably, knows that isn't entirely true. The sixth thing is guilt, and it is usually directed inward rather than outward, which surprises a lot of people who assume avoidant behavior comes from a place of not caring. Lying awake, an avoidant person will often find themselves replaying their own actions rather than anyone else's. The specific moment they went cold, right when things started to feel close. The excuse they gave for needing space, that if they're honest with themselves in this particular hour, wasn't really about needing space at all. Some part of them knows exactly what they did in that moment and exactly why they did it, even if they'd never phrase it that plainly during the day. There is a private reckoning that unfolds in these late hours, an honest accounting of their own patterns that almost never makes it to the surface once morning arrives and the armor goes back on. This guilt doesn't usually lead to any immediate action. It doesn't produce a text the next morning or a conversation that finally addresses what happened. Mostly, it just sits there, unresolved, tucked away until the next quiet night brings it back up again in almost exactly the same form. The seventh thing is what I call the almost, and it is one of the most quietly devastating parts of this entire pattern. This is the moment where an avoidant person gets right up to the edge of actually reaching out. A message gets partially typed. A contact name gets pulled up on the screen. The cursor sits there blinking in an empty text box for a long, uncomfortable stretch of time, sometimes a full minute or more, while an entire internal battle plays out behind a completely still face. And then, more often than not, the phone gets locked, set face down on the nightstand, and the moment passes without anything having been sent at all. This moment of almost happens far more frequently than anyone on the outside would ever guess, precisely because it leaves no trace. Nobody receives a message, nobody sees a missed call. There is no evidence that anything happened at all, except in the private experience of the person who lived through it. But it is real proof that the feeling underneath everything is present, active, and pressing right up against the surface, even when the follow-through never actually arrives. The fear of exposure, the fear of being vulnerable, the fear of risking rejection after already surviving whatever originally taught them that vulnerability wasn't safe, wins out over the longing almost every single time. And that fear winning doesn't mean the longing wasn't real. It just means the fear, for now, is still louder. And the eighth thing, the final one, is the rare occasion when an avoidant person stops fighting it entirely. Some nights, though not many, they simply let themselves feel the full weight of everything they've been avoiding, without distraction, without rationalizing it away, into something smaller and more manageable, without reaching for anything to numb it or explain it out of existence. In these brief, unguarded windows, they get more honest with themselves than they typically allow during any part of their waking day. There's no audience to perform for, not even themselves, in the sense of the internal narrator who usually keeps things tidy and explainable. In this window, the feeling simply gets to exist exactly as it is. It doesn't last long. By morning, the walls are usually back in place. The composed and self-sufficient version returns right on schedule, and the night's honesty gets quietly tucked away as though it never happened at all. But for those few minutes, in that particular kind of dark, it was completely real. And that reality doesn't disappear or become untrue simply because nobody else was there to witness it, and because the person experiencing it chose, once again, not to carry it forward into daylight. Now, I want to step back for a moment and talk about what all 8 of these things actually add up to, because understanding each piece individually is useful, but understanding the pattern as a whole is where the real insight lives. Every single one of these behaviors, the silent scrolling, the restless pacing, the imagined conversations, the involuntary memories, the checking without connecting, the private guilt, the almost, and the rare moments of full honesty, all point toward the same underlying truth. Avoidant people do not feel less than everyone else. In many cases, they feel just as much, sometimes even more, but they have spent years constructing an elaborate internal system whose entire purpose is to keep those feelings contained, managed, and hidden from view, including their own view. This system was built for a reason. It was built because at some point, likely very early, feeling deeply and expressing that depth openly led to pain, rejection, or disappointment, significant enough that the nervous system decided the safest path forward was containment rather than expression. And that system, once built, doesn't simply switch off because the original danger has passed. It keeps running night after night, long after the person or the circumstances that necessitated it are gone. If you have ever loved someone avoidant, if you have ever lain awake yourself, wondering whether you crossed their mind at all once your day together ended, I want you to sit with something important. There was very likely an entire private world unfolding on their end that you never had access to. A version of them that existed only in the dark, only when nobody, including themselves, was fully watching. This doesn't mean you owe them anything for it. It doesn't mean you should wait around indefinitely hoping that hidden, more honest version eventually becomes the one they choose to consistently show you in daylight. Because hope is not the same thing as a plan, and waiting for someone else's private reckoning to finally surface publicly is not a foundation you can build an entire life on. But it does mean something important for your own peace of mind. It means the connection you felt, the depth you sensed, even when their outward behavior didn't seem to match it, was very likely not something you imagined or invented out of longing. It was real to them too, in its own hidden, complicated way. They simply never learned how to let that reality exist anywhere except in the dark, in the hours when nobody was asking anything of them, in the silence where feeling something didn't yet require the terrifying next step of saying it out loud to another person who could actually hear it, actually respond to it, and actually have the power to either meet them there or walk away. Whether or not they ever learn to bring that nighttime honesty into the daylight, whether or not they ever build the courage to let the person they were missing see even a fraction of what was happening underneath, is not something you can control or wait out indefinitely. What you can control is refusing to shrink your own life around the possibility that they might. You can hold compassion for the wound that built those walls in the first place, and still choose, without guilt, to build a life surrounded by people who don't need the cover of darkness to finally be honest about what they feel. Understanding what happens in the dark doesn't obligate you to keep waiting there for someone else. It simply means you finally understand what you were actually up against. And that understanding, more than anything, is what allows you to stop questioning whether any of it was ever real in the first place.